We are introduced to Mimori Toka, a kid who has less personality as a bag of rocks. He has accustomed himself to a life of isolation due to his traumatic upbringing and abusive parents, so now he impulsively tries to fade into the background and avoid trouble. Right now, the class president, Sogu, is getting bullied by the class jerk, Oyamada, who has stolen her book for no reason. And no one really cares enough to help her, especially not the teacher who clearly hates his job. Since no one is stepping up to save Sogu, Mimori decides to take action for once and gets up from his seat to ask Oyamada to return her book. Oyamada is surprised that a nobody like Mimori would dare stand up to him. However, just as he is about to start bullying Mimori as well, the class Chad Takuto speaks up and tells Oyamada to quiet down. Oyamada tries to appeal to Takuto and says he wants to teach Mimori his place as a background character, but Takuto doesn't intend to let that happen. To be clear, he doesn't care about Mimori at all, or Sogu for that matter. He just doesn't want Oyamada to cause any more trouble because it's annoying to listen to. Oyamada doesn't like it, but since Takuto is the alpha, he has no choice but to listen to him and settle down. Oyamada returns Sogu's book and sits back down. But since he needs to keep himself entertained, he quietly starts bullying the kid across from him, Yasu. The teacher finally speaks up and tells Oyamada to quit messing with Yasu. He doesn't really care, but if Oyamada bullies Yasu so much that he ends up jumping off a bridge, then he won't get his yearly bonus. But if Yasu wants to jump off a bridge after his bonus, then the teacher has no problem with it as long as he does a flip. Things get quiet on the bus after that, but then all the students are suddenly transported into a room where they are greeted by the goddess Vicious. She explains that her kingdom, Alien, summons brave warriors to have them fight the evil demon emperor every time he appears. The last time the demon emperor showed up was 200 years ago, and he was thankfully defeated by the valiant efforts of the previous heroes. However, the great emperor has been revived once more, so Alien has summoned the students to be the next heroes of the kingdom of Alien. The students are still greatly confused by everything that has happened so far, so they think this entire thing is either a prank or maybe they all died in a bus crash. The teacher gets everyone's attention and tells them that he's not sure what's going on either, but for now, they should all just listen to Vicious. Vicious thanks him, thinking he understands what she has been saying. But in reality, he is just blinded by Booba. Perverted teacher aside, Mimori takes a moment to assess the situation. This building doesn't seem like anything he has ever seen before. There's a goddess standing in front of him, and he doesn't feel like he's in a dream, so there's only one conclusion to be made. They have actually been summoned to another world. Takuto clarifies that the goddess wants them to defeat this so-called demon emperor, but he wants to know what happens if they refuse to cooperate. The goddess tells them that she unfortunately does not have the power to send them home if they don't want to become Alien's heroes, but there is still a way for them to go back to Earth. It involves a reverse summoning ritual which requires an evil element, and the only way to acquire this evil element is to get it from the heart of the demon emperor, or to absorb the element as it is released upon the death of the demon emperor. Oyamada still doesn't see a reason why any of them should put their lives on the line to fight this demon emperor when Vicious essentially kidnapped them. So Vicious does the only thing she can and begs them to reconsider being this world's saviors. Sobu speaks up to introduces herself as the class president, and even if Vicious refers to them as saviors, they are still just high school students, so they wouldn't be of much use if they were sent into war. Vicious tells her that there's no need to worry about that since they have been bestowed with powers that no other human being in this world has. They all find this hard to believe, so Vicious decides to give them a little demonstration to prove that special abilities truly exist. She calls for a prisoner to be brought out, and then a demonic beast which proceeds to eat the prisoner. And after the demon has mercilessly mauled the prisoner, Vicious casts a fireball to incinerate it. That should have sufficiently traumatized the students so they can accept that they are in a new world. And now that they've come to believe what she has been saying, Vicious directs their attention to a crystal ball which will be used to evaluate their abilities. One by one, the students step up to have their abilities evaluated, and they all seem to have decent aptitude. Notably, when Oyamada goes up to the crystal ball, it glows a brilliant red color, meaning he is incredibly powerful by this world's standards. Next up is Takuto, and when he puts his hand on the crystal, it completely shatters. Everyone is shocked and confused by what's just happened, so the goddess explains this means Takuto is S rank. S rank is the top of the line when it comes to power and leaves above everyone else, so having a single S rank hero is already really lucky. But as the aptitude test continues, it is revealed that Sogu is also S rank as she shatters the backup orb they brought in. And it doesn't end there either, as there is a third S rank hero who shatters the second backup orb in storage. Vicious is in disbelief at how wonderful the hero roster is turning out to be, so she asks who the next person is going to be. And that person turns out to be Mimori. He puts his hand on the crystal, and it begins to glow purple, but the light emanating from the orb is much weaker than it was with the others, so he asks Vicious what his rank is. However, she completely ignores him and asks for the next person to come up. Miyamori is used to getting ignored, so he just rolls with it and moves on, but then he notices that the last person to be examined was Yusa, and the orb shows a dark mass in the center, which means he is the dark hero of the group, and as far as their records show, the dark hero is often far more powerful than any other heroes in the group. So essentially, everyone needs to be careful because the quiet kid just got his gun. After that, the goddess gave everyone instructions on how to check their statuses, and when Miyamori takes a look at his stats, he realizes that his stats kinda suck. The goddess created this window so that the heroes could get accurate information about their abilities wherever they want, so Miyamori looks a little closer and notices something called an inherent skill. Inherent skills are skills that are unique to any given hero, and they can typically be used immediately, but some may need to be awakened at a higher level. But that's enough explanations for now, as Vicious tells everyone that they will now be performing a very necessary ritual for their success. She calls Miyamori forward and explains that he is E rank, and as the record books show, the lowest ranked heroes always did nothing but slow down the more powerful ones, therefore she's making the executive decision to dispose of him. However, killing a hero just for being weak would be too morally ambiguous for her, so she decided to give Miyamori a chance to earn his life back. Instead of outright killing him, she will send him to some ruins, and if he manages to survive, then he can live as he pleases in the world. Miyamori asks if these ruins are dangerous, and Vicious answers that of course the ruins are dangerous, it wouldn't be much of an execution grounds if it were safe. Miyamori tries to talk his way out of this and says he has an inherent skill of abnormal status endowment, so that must be useful to the team somehow, but to his dismay, the goddess tells him that abnormal status spells and skills in this world are totally useless, since they almost never actually work as intended, and even when they do work, they aren't very useful anyway. Miyamori tries to appeal to the goddess's morality and says she can't just dispose of him when she is the one who summoned him here without his consent, but her name is literally Vicious, so I don't think she cares. As Miyamori is trying to come to terms with his fate, Yasu touches his shoulder, and Miyamori thinks Yasu is going to stand up for him since he used to help him out back when he was getting bullied on Earth. However, now that he has power, Yasu has turned into just as much of a jerk as the others, so he mocks Miyamori for being weak and condemns him to his terrible fate. By now, Miyamori has realized that no one cares about him being disposed of here, and all the other students just want him gone. So he stands to accept his fate as Vicious throws him a magic bag as a consolation gift. However, there's at least one person there who knows this isn't right, as Sobu steps up and asks Vicious to reconsider the disposal of Miyamori. However, Vicious is dead set on disposing of Miyamori, so she just knocks Sogu out so she can't complain about it. Miyamori can't stand the cruelty and mockery any longer, so he attempts to use his abnormal status effect skill to paralyze the goddess. But unfortunately, as a goddess, she always has an anti-abnormal status shield which she hasn't used since the Heian era. She mocks Miyamori for failing his attack, and without further delay, she wants everyone to witness as this loser is teleported to his doom. Just then, Takudu fires off a blast, which leaves a huge hole in the wall. But as the goddess looks over to him, he clarifies that he isn't trying to save Miyamori or anything. He just wanted to test out his powers and didn't realize it would do that much damage. Some of Miyamori's classmates derive joy in watching him be disposed of, while others remain indifferent, and the one person who supported him was knocked out. So as he is about to be teleported, Miyamori gives up on his background character act and gives Vicious the middle finger, vowing to make her regret this someday. Miyamori wakes up in the abandoned ruins and tries to open his status screen, but his system tells him that he is unable to do so because of the low level of light in the area. That's when he remembers the bag he got, so after pouring a little mana into it, it generates enough light for him to see again. However, as he's walking around, he stumbles across a human skeleton on the ground, and whatever killed the skeleton is still in the ruins, so Miyamori is on edge now. He ends up tripping over some rocks, and it's a good thing he did because that allowed him to narrowly evade a sneak attack from a terrifying monster. He has no time to think or worry about where he's running to because if he stops for even a moment, he will be killed. As he continues to run, Miyamori ends up tripping over a rock, and as the monster closes in on him, the emotion he is feeling isn't fear, but rather frustration. Frustration at the fact that he was abandoned by all those jerks and is doomed to die because of it. He has no weapons to fight back with, and no useful skills to use since his abnormal status effects are apparently unlikely to work. However, that doesn't mean he's not going to try and use whatever he can to survive, so Miyamori casts Paralyze on the monster, and to his astonishment, it actually works. He doesn't want to stick around to figure out why though, so he runs away again. As he does this, he thinks to himself that the paralysis must have been a one-time fluke, since Vicious said abnormal status effects have a low success rate. But in his haste to escape, Miyamori ends up running into another monster which looks like a cross between a chicken and a roach. Whatever it is going to kill him if he doesn't do something quickly, so Miyamori raises his hand and casts Paralyze again, fully expecting it to fail, but miraculously, it works again. Once could be a fluke, but 2 times in a row means his effect's success rate is way higher than what the goddess had claimed. It's possible that Miyamori's status effects are different from the weak ones that are native to this world, but even if he can defend himself with his spells, it will do him no good if he ends up running out of mana to use it. He only has 1 mana point left, so he uses it to cast poison on the monster, and once he does this, the monster begins to slowly die. In addition to having a high success rate, Miyamori's spells also have a really long duration, so he can just sit back and wait for the monster to die. He officially has 0 mana points left, so he doesn't know what will happen if he tries to use his status effects again. However, he doesn't get much time to recover as the first monster has caught up to him. The paralysis effect he cast earlier must have worn off, but even if he has no mana left, no one will come to save him, so Miyamori is prepared to fight for his survival. He attempts to use Paralyze on the Minotaur again, but this time the skill fails to activate, so Miyamori has to jump out of the way. He is informed by the system that he is not allowed to cast the same effect multiple times on a single target, so he comes up with a new plan and casts Sleep on the Minotaur, causing it to fall to the ground unconscious, and once the monster is out cold, Miyamori applies poison to it as well. It looks like there are no restrictions on stacking effects, but he is out of mana, so if he keeps using his skills, he will eventually burn through his stamina as well, and there are still a lot more monsters for him to deal with. Miyamori begins spamming Paralysis, and eventually he has managed to stop all the monsters, but has left him on the verge of collapse. However, his troubles aren't over yet as even more monsters begin to approach, so he has no choice but to keep using Paralyze until his body can't take it anymore, and it's not long before he reaches his limit and can't go on. There are still a lot of monsters around him, but he knows if he tries to use his skill even one more time, it could mean the end of him. He has no other options available, but luckily, just as he's about to use up the last of his body's stamina, the cockatrice that he poisoned a while ago suddenly dies, and due to this, Miyamori's level shoots up until he is at level 258 and both his mana and stamina are replenished. Miyamori doesn't understand what happened at first, but then he notices the dead monster and realizes that he must have gotten experience because his poison killed that one, and with his energy replenished, he can keep fighting as much as necessary. As he continues to spam Paralysis, his skill levels up, leading him to believe he can upgrade it by repeated use, but he will worry about that later since for now, he has to make sure he can escape this place alive. With his Paralysis now being level 2, Miyamori notices that he now has the option to select multiple targets at once, so he does so, and the monsters are all immediately frozen in place. So far, his status effects have had 100% success rate, so Vicious is probably the only person in this world that his skill has no effect on. He begins inflicting poison on all the paralyzed monsters, and eventually his poison skill levels up as well, but there are still a lot more monsters here. So that means he can level up even more. Miyamori takes a look at his status window, and since he leveled up, his stats are far higher than they were when he first got here, especially his mana, which is now over 8,000, and mana is his only way of surviving this hellhole. Miyamori takes a break and sits down while he waits for the poison to do its thing, and eventually, the monsters begin dying one by one, raising Miyamori's level even further. By the time he is level 500, Miyamori is fairly confident that he can now make it out of the ruins, so he prepares to take care of the remaining monsters. However, after seeing Miyamori kill dozens of them with ease, the monsters have enough common sense to know that they shouldn't mess with him, so they all run off. Now that the area is safe, Miyamori sifts through the piles of rotting bones in order to find any loot that he could use, and after getting his hands on a cloak and a blade, he sets off to escape the ruins. As he looks for the exit, he comes across many different monsters, but he has realized that he faces another problem. He has no food, so he's going to starve soon if he doesn't get something to eat. He is so desperate that he is even willing to eat monster meat, so after retracing his steps, he returns to the monster corpses and reluctantly begins carving into them to eat what he can. However, as the eyeball pops out and Miyamori tries to eat it, he realizes that the monster's entire body has acid in it, so he won't be able to eat it after all. With no source of food, Miyamori believes he will starve to death before he ever makes it out of here. He has no energy left in his body, but then he notices the color of his magic bag changing, and since that's the only source of light he has, he frantically rushes over to supply it with more mana. However, as he does so, he feels something appear inside the bag, and to his delight, he finds a bag of beef jerky and a bottle of soda. He excitedly begins eating, and while this means his hunger problem is solved for now, he doesn't know for sure if he will be able to get the bag to produce food again. As days continue to pass inside the ruins, Miyamori has gotten used to committing mass monster genocide with his skills, but he is worried that he might be losing his humanity because of this. Back on Earth after suffering abuse at the hands of his stepfather, Miyamori was on the verge of having his murderous villain arc right then and there, but before he could lose his sense of humanity, he was rescued by his aunt and uncle who took him in and gave him a sense of normalcy. He learned empathy from them, and he thought he had become a normal person like them, but right now, as he is staring at the mountain of corpses beneath his feet, he feels nothing at all. There's no going back to how he was before, so Miyamori just accepts that he's a psychopath now and moves on. As he goes, he comes across another section of the ruins with a floating eyeball monster, but Miyamori just takes it out with his poison. As he moves forward, he comes across a door with a magic lock, and upon opening it, he finds a small room with two skeletons inside. He assumes they must have been people that were disposed of by Vicious as well, but they weren't fortunate enough to make it out alive. He searches through their things and finds a pouch full of gems, so while he feels bad about stealing from the dead, the gems could be valuable and he could use them once he gets out of here, so he no longer feels bad about it. He goes through the other rooms nearby as well, and eventually he comes across one that takes a large amount of mana to open. But once he finally unlocks it, he finds a skeleton sitting with a note next to it. The note says that the skeleton was once a man known as Anglin the Great Sage, and he was the former hero of darkness. The same one Vicious had mentioned was the strongest of them all. According to Anglin's note, Vicious sent him here by force after she no longer has a need for him as a hero, and while he was powerful enough to make it this far, he clearly couldn't escape, so he left a message to help the next person who could manage to make it this far. Vicious may have said the Demon Lord was evil, but she is just as bad in Miyamori's eye. Although we can't say he is much better than her either, since his only goal is to get revenge on her, and he doesn't care if he has to destroy the world to do it. As he is looting Anglin's corpse, he comes across a book of forbidden arts, and it is full of information about recipes for medicine and magic tool instructions that could prove to be useful later, so he decides to keep it. He also finds a scroll of forbidden magic, but he doesn't understand what it says. However, if a great sage like Anglin went through all the trouble of keeping it hidden with him up until his final moments, then it must be really powerful, and it may even be strong enough for Miyamori to eventually defeat the goddess if he is ever able to decipher it. Miyamori is just about ready to leave, but before he goes, he steals Anglin's cloak because it's cooler than his old one, and takes a look at Anglin's book again. But this time he sees a bloody warning, telling him to beware of the Soul Eater. And the ominous warning has Miyamori wondering if the Soul Eater is the one who killed Anglin. Miyamori continues making his way through the ruins until he comes across a door that he thinks will lead to the surface. However, if this is truly the final door, then that must mean the Soul Eater Anglin was talking about is here as well. Miyamori remains cautious of his surroundings and takes a look at his stats to make sure he is prepared for this. He did all he could to ensure he leveled up as much as possible before he got here, so he can only hope that his skills are enough to defeat it. Miyamori eventually finds a creepy face, and he is certain that this must be the Soul Eater, so he immediately attempted to use Paralyze on it. But the second he steps out of cover, the Soul Eater fires a laser into his hand. This is the first time anything has managed to stop him from using his skill, and Miyamori has to kill it since the only way out is to use the gem on its forehead. To activate his skill, he needs to say it out loud and be within a certain distance, but none of that matters if the Soul Eater can attack him before he finishes casting the spell. While Miyamori is still thinking about what to do, the Soul Eater breaks out of the wall to go after him, so he really has no choice but to fight now. Meanwhile, outside the ruins, a girl is trying to escape from her pursuers and decides to hide nearby, not knowing that a fierce battle is taking place inside. As the Soul Eater slowly approaches Miyamori, he wonders why it hasn't fired its lasers at him yet, but he soon finds out why as the Soul Eater spits up some purple gunk, which takes the form of humans. These are the souls of the people the Soul Eater has killed, and they are being forced to attack Miyamori, so if he is forced to paralyze them, however, he can't bring himself to use poison because they are still human, even if they become gross globs of paste. The Soul Eater enjoys watching as Miyamori struggles because he can't attack the souls for moral reasons, and he can't attack the Soul Eater either because it would react too fast. Miyamori begins breaking down and crying a lot because he says he doesn't want to hurt other people, and he's losing aura by the minute with his constant crying. But as the Soul Eater is reveling in Miyamori's tears, he reveals that it was all an act as he paralyzes the Soul Eater. He knew he could never land a successful paralyze on the Soul Eater unless he managed to get it to lower its guard, so he pretended to be in the middle of a mental crisis just so the Soul Eater wouldn't suspect anything. And now that the Soul Eater is paralyzed, Mimori doesn't really care what happens to the souls if he kills the Soul Eater, and even though he spends so much time trying to become a harmless, law-abiding citizen, all he cares about are facts. Those soul puppets were trying to kill him, so they could be babies for all he cares. He's still going to poison them anyway. The Soul Eater struggles to move out of frustration that it lost to Mimori, and this lets Mimori know that powerful monsters can try to overcome his paralysis, but it does additional damage to their bodies. That's interesting and all, but he doesn't want to waste any more time here, so he casts poison on the Soul Eater and destroys it once and for all. Upon doing so, the souls that the Soul Eater consumed are released, and they all appear in front of Mimori to thank him for freeing them. They've been rooting for him as he tried to survive the ruins, and none of them really mind the fact that he looted their bodies either. Mimori is then approached by Anglin, and he has only one thing to say. He wants Mimori to take down the goddess and avenge them all. The souls of the dead pass on after that, and while Mimori normally wouldn't accept a request without some sort of compensation, he was already planning on taking her down anyway. And now that the final monster has been defeated, Mimori can open the door and begin his quest for revenge on the surface. This was the end of episode 2. Subscribe to not miss the next part.